So Crysis 3 has been out for a couple of weeks now, which means I am very late posting this review. But better late than never, right? I mean, it's not like it's a completely bad thing. It's always good having a 2-week-old opinion of a game. Lateness of this review being pushed aside, I did have some pretty interesting thoughts when I was playing Crysis 3, and I did want to get my thoughts out and share them with you guys, so here it is, my late review of Crysis 3. Crysis 3 takes place 24 years after the events of Crysis 2, and sees you playing as Prophet, a returning character from earlier in the series. At the beginning of the game, being led by Psycho, another returning character, you learn that the corrupt Cell Corporation have crafted this massive dome encasing New York City, the New York City Liberty Dome, under the guise of protecting the population from the remaining Ceph alien forces. The story sees Prophet joining up with the resistance against the Cell Corporation, with the ultimate goal of bringing down the remaining alien Ceph forces, including the massive Alpha Ceph, who continually throughout the game appears as a vision to Prophet. A quick foreword here, I haven't actually played any games previous to this in the Crysis series, so Crysis 3 was my first jump into the series, and while I did have a very good time with it, in terms of the story, I felt that I wasn't really getting any real attachment to the characters or anything they stood for. I just found it a little bit detached. Like, I enjoyed the story definitely, but I just didn't feel like I was there in the moment with the characters. I mean, while I definitely found it an interesting story and easy enough to sort of pick up and follow along, I found that, especially near the end of the game, I just wasn't connected emotionally with the characters at all, and I just didn't care for any of their plights on a more personal level. And that may not be a big deal to a lot of gamers, which is not a problem at all, but when I play games, I do like to play for the story as much as the gameplay, so here, having the story not really connect with me did sort of pose a bit of a problem. For example, and this is definitely the biggest example that I could think of, throughout the entire game, Psycho, the returning character who leads you at the beginning of the game, will just constantly nag and whine about having been removed from his nanosuit and how he doesn't have the physical powers that he used to since he's been removed. And while I understand that realistically a person in Psycho's situation would have formed some sort of emotional bond with themselves and the suit being one, that's not what Psycho ever complains about. It's always about the fact that his physical powers are no longer the same as when they were in the suit. The fact that he's constantly complaining to Prophet, it's his only real constant story in the game. Like, as the game went on and just kept continuing, I just feel myself being like, would you just stop? Just stop. I don't want to hear you whining anymore, Psycho. It's just, stop. Oh no, they took away my suit and now I can't jump as high as I used to be able to. No, just stop. I mean, it's just the nature of the complaining and the regularity of it that just makes it a bit boring over time. Another thing that I found with the game's story was that it really jumped into the finality of it all really quickly. The game itself doesn't last too long, unfortunately. I've heard that people have managed to beat it in about 6 hours. I stretched it out to 7 or 8 myself, but it's definitely not a huge long campaign to play through. One of the things that I think actually made it feel quite short to me was the fact that they jumped into the finality really quickly. I mean, they started out with the tutorial area, a couple of basic missions to sort of get used to the suit again, and then after that it's like, boom, this is the final push, this is it, and you're like, oh, I'm 3 hours in, but I guess we're doing the final battle now? And while that's not the case, it just kind of feels like it is. I mean, 3 or 4 hours into the game and they've brought you into this big final episode. I mean, that does stretch on for the remainder of the game, which in my case was a good 5 or 6 hours, but it still just made it feel like they were really cramming everything in to the final mission, and I just didn't really enjoy it here. I mean, because the final battle was brought up so soon and you were kind of tossed into it, it felt like they were almost teasing the big final showdown, and I just didn't enjoy it. I'd like to jump into the presentation of the game now. Since I haven't actually played any previous games in this series, Crysis has always just been one of two things for me. Either the first one being a benchmark, you know, can your PC run Crysis on the highest settings? And the second one just being that I knew it was a game that had some beautiful graphics. In terms of presentation, Crysis 3 does not disappoint. I ran the game only on the high settings. I tried ultra high, but with my rig the FPS was just way too high to sort of render it playable. But I had a lot of fun and the game is still beautiful on the high settings. I'd often find myself entering a new game area and just taking a few moments to sort of pan the camera around and look around at the new setting and just sort of take it all in and be a little bit overwhelmed at the time. Occasionally near the beginning of the game, I did this for so long that I'd actually lose Psycho, who was leading me through the level, and have to restart. The game also features a really impactful soundtrack, which I wasn't really expecting. I knew the game had those really amazing graphics, but the soundtrack was not something that I'd ever heard amped up about Crysis. It just sort of adds to everything. It's a really good kind of finisher on the presentation. You load up a new area, walk in, kind of take it all in, and suddenly that music just kicks in and just pumps everything up that little bit more.
Throw an EMP! I got you covered.
I played Crysis 3 on PC, as I believe you should, and control-wise it definitely hit all the standard marks for me. The only real problems I had with the default key bindings were that sometimes I'd be stealthily sneaking around, I'd hit B to bring up my visor, but I'd accidentally hit V for melee, which would automatically kick me out of my stealth suit, which would sometimes, occasionally, bring myself out in the open for shootings. Despite the fact that I normally tend to ignore stealthy games because they're not really something that I enjoy, I actually had a lot of fun sneaking around as Prophet, taking out the cell troopers in a really sneaky way, either with a stealthy melee kill or the handy bowgun. In fact, one of the first suit upgrades that I made was the ability to remain cloaked and shoot the bowgun, meaning a multiple number of times I would walk right up to an enemy, shoot him straight in the face, and he'd be none the wiser. I loved the fact that I was able to upgrade the nanosuit because it meant that I could customize the suit and the game to fit more with my preferred style of gameplay. Because I really enjoyed playing cloaked more often than not, it meant that I was able to add to my repertoire things like being able to see enemies' footsteps, quicker cloaking, and of course the aforementioned ability to remain stealthed and shoot the bowgun. By far, the biggest problem that I had with the gameplay here was the fact that pretty much every single level is just punctuated by a number of vague objective markers, and more often than not these markers are nothing more than a quick button press or just a trigger to another marker or another cutscene, and it definitely feels like you're just being sort of tugged around to different areas after a while. This also meant that I had pretty much zero interest in completing any of the secondary objectives. The HUD would show your primary objective in one direction, as well as your secondaries in wherever they are, and because they were so far away, I felt like I had zero interest in going over and completing them. The game also rarely gave you any real reason or motivator to go and do these objectives. I mean, occasionally they'd say things like, you should go and clear out this area so that this plane can land here, but it gave you no reason as to how that plane landing would help you, and if the plane didn't land, what would happen? It didn't give you any motivator, so I felt that more often than not, almost all the time, I completely ignored the secondary objectives. I think the biggest problem here was the fact that the vague objective markers felt to me like those boring fetch quests in an MMO game. It was like, go and do this, I'm not really giving you a real reason, but go and do this so that you can continue the game. It feels like a kind of lazy way of showing you where to go, and I don't know, just didn't enjoy it at all. To sum everything up, despite this being my first foray into the series, I actually had a lot of fun with Crysis 3, and I wasn't expecting to be quite honest with you guys. I enjoyed it more than I thought I would. The big pros here for me were definitely the presentation of the game in both audio and visual, as well as the really enjoyable stealthy elements of gameplay. The cons would definitely be Psycho's incessant whining, along with the linear feel of the game due to those objective markers. All in all, regardless of if you played the first two games or not, Crysis 3 is definitely an interesting game and it's worth looking into for anyone who's into a shooter with those real big sci-fi elements. And that is my review of Crysis 3, so thank you guys so much for watching. Please go ahead and leave me a comment if you have any sort of response. If you've played the game, let me know what your thoughts were, but please don't post any spoilers for those who haven't played the game yet. Don't forget to like and favourite this video if you enjoyed it, and thank you again for watching. I'll see you guys again soon for another gaming video. Bye!